Hey, welcome back. I got mine to go today, so we're going to be here for just a very short period of time. But last time we talked about filters and definitions and how our filters and all of our experiences and everything in life really color what it is that we see, how we define words and events, and how we communicate with each other. And today I wanted to share with you about what we value when it comes to communication. Because value is kind of it's a little bit of a misunderstood concept. Most of the time we think of value whenever we think of prices, what I value. Somebody might value an espresso. I don't really value an espresso, but they might pay a certain amount for it. I would actually have to have you pay me to drink one voluntarily. I like just straight coffee or the kind of the foo-foo milky stuff. That's more my taste. I value something slightly different than what you value it. So when we talk about topics of conversation, we have to bring value into it as well. See, value has a lot to do with my reason for having the conversation. Why am I having it? What am I trying to get out of the conversation? That's what value is all about. I give so that I can get. That's a value proposition. So that whenever we start talking about value in conversation, I found this really interesting study where they took an age range of 17 to 80-year-olds, both men and women, and they gave them a list of 22 topics of conversation to be able to choose which ones that they use the most often, and then they had them give some commentary on the conversations and the topics of conversation as well. Some of the things that I found really interesting that I wrote down was that of the 22 topics of conversation, work, movies, and television were the top 3 for both sexes, both men and women, all age ranges. Those were the things that people talked about the most. What I found more interesting, though, than even the topics of conversation, because men talked about things like current events and sports, women talked about things like relationships and family and those sorts of things. And I don't think anybody would be very surprised by any of that. What I did find unique that they came up with in the study, and I found it reinforced in other studies, was that when men talked about their conversations, they talked about the value being in the camaraderie they felt. They felt the freedom of the conversations. They didn't have to be as careful in their conversations, and they felt like they were more fun. Okay, so that's one side of it. Women, they felt camaraderie in a very, very special way as well, but it was defined differently. They thought of camaraderie as empathy and somebody that was there to understand them. So there were 2 different ways of coming at the same thing when we talked about conversations. What did we value differently in one conversation versus another? When men talked about it, they expected women to engage in conversations in the very same fast-paced, bottom line, free kind of style that they engaged in conversations for, in the same way that they would with one of their other guy friends, and the same way that they would want to engage for that woman in particular. You can start to see where some of these issues come up. Women, on the other hand, wanted to be understood. They wanted to be able to get in and really understand their friend, the person that they were talking to, a little bit more. They wanted empathy, as I mentioned before, and they wanted a conversation that went way below and way deeper than a man's typical bottom line style. So you can see where these things start to come together and cause conflicts. One of the things that we can do to really help bridge that gap and not change one another, but put ourselves in a position to be able to communicate more effectively according to the value that the other person has on conversation, is we can assume an attitude of trust. In fact, I want you to get your pen and paper and write that down. Assume an attitude of trust. I want you to assume that the other person is sincerely trying to communicate with you. And the only way that they can start to communicate in a way that brings better value for you is if you express to them in a nice way what it is that you're looking for in a conversation, how you would like them to interact. And then ask them, maybe even before, ask them how they would like you to interact with them so that you create greater value for them in return. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to take your pen and paper, and I want you to write down 4 things that you value in conversation. You might have to think about this a little bit because you probably never thought about it before. but write down what are the things that you like to get out of a conversation. And don't write things down, well, I'm a woman, so I must want this, or I'm a guy, so I must want this. Write down what you want. You're unique, you're an individual. You're going to have your own particular values, so I want you to write that down as soon as possible. I'll talk to you next time. We got a couple more things to cover, and your communication is going to be great because of it.